and let us all do we can to build a better future.
All right, well, speaking of safeties being reduced across the globe, we've been talking a lot on this show about the Supreme Court and the Roe v. Wade decision and that kind of thing. And so I wanted to look into a few more of the other cases that have recently come out or are going to be heard soon, that are also endangering Americans and our safety. So first of all, there was one that was earlier last month, I guess. West Virginia versus the EPA. Have you heard anything about?
Well, I've heard about that, and it's a real concern at this time because we are dealing with massive climate issues right now.
Right.
And there's also the issues of environmental justice, and we oftentimes talk about that. Historically, Heartland has focused on environmental justice issues, but yeah.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, the case that was recently heard was West Virginia versus the EPA, and this ruling essentially really rolled back the EPA's ability to reduce carbon output in existing power plants. So the EPA had put out a couple of new establishing rules, new laws about how power plants were able to function, and this is the kind of equipment you're allowed to use. This is the emissions you're allowed to produce. So they put these rules in place, and then they started trying to enact them. And then the power plants kind of fought back. And the Supreme Court determined that no one other than Congress can make laws, essentially. Even the ones that are like, if you're the organization, no, you can't make your laws. We have to be a lot more regulatory. And the Supreme Court said that the courts are the ones who are allowed to decide what is too regulatory and what is not regulatory enough, and when they were pushed on that, it's like, well, what does that mean? Kavanaugh said that, we'll know it when we see it, essentially. Like, that was his essential takeaway. It's like, well, we'll know it when we see it. And it's just...
It's kind of like the obscenity case. That was what they said. You know when something's obscene when you see it. You know it when you see it.
It is like that. And it is unnerving at a time where they're kind of, it seems like they are giving themselves extra power from their little castle on high to decide how much regulation is too much regulation for everybody. And they are not, it just is giving them it's giving them so much more power to determine that for everybody else. And it's like, well, why do you guys get to make that decision? You're not on the ground. You're not involved with the organization that is supposed to be protecting our environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Supreme Court has a difficult job. They're not elected. They're not elected officials, and it's one of the reasons. Well, we'll talk about that later. But I feel like sometimes criticism that is made of the Supreme Court justices seems to be treating them as if they're elected officials, which they are not. Their job is to interpret the law, right. and that's civics 101. And of course, it can be incredibly subjective. You expect them to know and understand the law, but it's not necessarily. It's not always. That itself is subject to interpretation.
Yeah.
And in this case, again, regulatory state, which I report on a lot on this show, it is an issue of some controversy because it's the idea here you've got these regulatory agencies that can issue regulations which have the force and effect of law, but the agencies themselves are not democratically elected. They're
not either.
Yeah,
no one
and they're making their decisions that deeply affect people's lives without the kind of oversight that our elected officials do.
Right.
So it's the administrative state is so thick in this country. I mean, it's thick, it's top heavy, it's there, and it has an enormous amount of power. Obviously, I'm not happy about the EPA not being able to do its job.
Right.
And again, but I think that there is that also the issue of, okay, if the Supreme Court is reining that in, there may be a real need to go back to the drawing board and, okay, this is, what Congress can say that this agency can or cannot do.
And I would accept that. The other concern with this particular ruling was that the Supreme Court used something called the the major questions doctrine, which they've never used before. And so it's like, okay, so now where's the stop button? And that was what the more liberal judges were like, wait, where's the stop part then? Where do we pause? And sort of in that same vein, there's a case that's going to be heard. It hasn't been heard yet, but they've agreed to hear it. It was called Moore versus Harper. And this is essentially about the independent state legislature doctrine.
Okay.
So that is essentially what conservatives and the conservative side of the Supreme Court, we worry. I don't know that they're going to do anything yet, but this is what conservatives are saying is that, well, back in the days of when they were writing the Constitution, legislature meant lawmakers. So you shouldn't be able to have courts or governors or anybody other than lawmakers determining anything involving like a federal election. The reason it came up was because North Carolina legislators, their lawmakers, came to the courts with a highly gerrymandered map right after the census that would have really given the Grand Old Party a leg up in the election. It probably would have netted them 2 Senate seats easy. And the judge was like, but we just did a census. This is not an accurate map. You cannot use it. This is the North Carolina Supreme Court. The judge in question said, today we answer this question. Does our state constitution recognize that the people of this state have the power to choose who govern them by giving us each an equally powerful voice through our vote? Or does our Constitution give to members of the General Assembly, as they argue here, our unlimited power to draw electoral maps to keep themselves and our members of Congress in office as long as they want, regardless of the will of the people, by making some votes more powerful than others, which is, again, the problem with gerrymandering. So the judges tried to block this.
Okay.
So it was taken up to the Supreme Court. And the North Carolina delegates are like, well, it only says legislature, and therefore courts and governors who also have the power to veto unfair voting practices, they can't do that anymore because it should be only lawmakers. Only lawmakers have the ability to do that. So again, I don't know, like worst case scenario, legislatures, Democrat, Republican, any of them, lawmakers will just kind of have the ability to decide that they don't want to be beholden to the voters at all, ever, which is concerning.
Yeah, it really is.
So that one's going to be heard soon. We do not know the outcome of that case yet, but it is one of the ones that is upcoming, and it's one that I have not heard anyone talking about because, again, we're very still focused on Roe. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about right now was the recent, in response, again, to a lot of the gun violence that has been going on. It was New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. Basically, the new SCOTUS ruling, and this was the same day that there was a bipartisan effort to pass a new bill in the Senate that would restrict gun laws, essentially. You know, if it would make it much more difficult for people to get guns. I don't think it's gone through the House yet, but it should pass in the House. But that the new rules basically say that if you steal a gun, you're more like there's a record, it's harder to get one that's been stolen. It's if you're under 21, you can't get a gun. If you can't buy an extended magazine, which is a big deal, because a lot of the most recent mass shooters uses these extended magazines. Sure. But if you can't get those, then you can't cause that kind of damage. If you've ever expressed intent to harm yourself or others on any kind of social media, it would expand the background check. So from 3 days to 10 days, it gives it just more time. And if you've any of these red flag laws, I think Jerry was talking about the red flag laws on Tuesday. So if any of those are, triggered, then your case is kind of bumped up to the FBI and they'll look at it. So this was the bill that went passed in the Senate the same day that the Supreme Court ruled that law-abiding Americans have a right to carry handguns outside the home in self-defense, just essentially anywhere. So this is New York, but because they decided in New York already, Maryland has already said, oh yeah, okay, sure, you can carry your handgun wherever you want to. And again, there are exceptions schools, of course, and federal buildings. But it used to be you had to have a good reason to need your gun outside the home. It's like that was the law. You have to have a good reason. And if you tell us a good reason and we believe your good reason, then yeah, sure, you can carry it outside the gun. Now you don't have to have a good reason. You just can. So people who are really championing, wow, words, can't do it. Champions of the new ruling say that it's not like this is. I've got a video about kind of Marjorie Taylor Greene had a lovely rant that she did. But like champions of this ruling are saying, well, it's not like having stricter gun laws actually stopped mass shootings in New York or places or Denmark. You know, they didn't stop it happening there. So like, what's the point? Which I just feel is really, really reductive. So it just seems like it's a wild time to make it easier for anybody to carry a gun outside their home because a lot of states are going to be taking them up on this.
Yeah.
They are. So we've got, okay, you can say something, and then we've got a video from Marjorie.
Oh, Marjorie.
Oh no, Marjorie. I got her video. Her talking about this. It's not about this in particular, but she's talking about, she's got a fun conspiracy theory that I wanted to.
She's got a few of them.
Oh yeah, but this is a super fun one, and she invented a holiday. So.
Okay.
It's short.
Now, here's what I have to say. I mean, 2 shootings on July 4th, one in a rich white neighborhood and the other at a fireworks display. It almost sounds like it's designed to persuade Republicans to go along with more gun control. I mean, after all, remember, we didn't see that happen at all the Pride parades in the month of June, but as soon as we hit MAGA month, as soon as we hit the month that we're all celebrating, loving our country, we have shootings on July 4th. I mean, that would sound like a conspiracy theory, right? Of course. But what's the definition of a right-wing conspiracy theory? Well, by the way, it's the news that's just 6 months early.
So I don't know where she got a lot of that.
Well, she's pandering.
Of course.
She's pandering, and
I was stunned to hear about MAGA month. What? Since when? I've never heard that.
And there was actually a mass shooting in Norway at a Pride event that happened. It did get a lot of airplay.
I didn't hear about it.
Yeah, so that did happen over in Norway. So that that's its own set of concerns. You don't need a conspiracy theory to explain that you have disaffected people who, in one case, planned a sociopathic attack as an expression of nihilism and confusion. I'm still not sure what happened in Philadelphia. I mean, it's not clear what happened there. But it was certainly very scary to watch that crowd running. And then the one in Orlando, which was a false alarm, but that caused that to happen.
And then recently the Brookfield Zoo, that happened. I don't think that was the 4th. It might have been the 5th, but like the 5th, shut that one down.
They shut that one down. It is very disturbing. But what I would say is, I mean, again, you don't have to have this great vast conspiracy to try and influence public opinion and legislation. You don't have to look at that. There's plenty of other things going on that explain what's been happening in this country for a while, including gun violence. This morning, in fact, we were talking about it before the show. This morning in Chicago, in Rogers Park, there is a homeless encampment at one of our parks. There are quite a few homeless encampments all springing up all around Chicago. At about 6:30 this morning, somebody opened fire on that homeless encampment. There is currently a gentleman who is in fair condition at the hospital. And we've had in Chicago and in other places numerous terrible attacks on the homeless. We had a homeless man here in Chicago who was set on fire. He is expected to live, but he had horrific burns. And so this morning, somebody just opened fire on a homeless encampment. Some of the most vulnerable people on the planet. And that's what happened. This is something that we have here in this country, and I don't think you need to develop a conspiracy theory. But it is a way of saying to people who maybe have some concerns about it, oh, by the way, we think you're stupid. This is a conspiracy theory. None of this is real. This is all being ginned up. And therefore, if you're allowing this to influence your voting or your concerns, well, clearly you're dumb.
Right.
And that works out very well for Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It does. I just also don't think that this is the time to be making it a lot easier for just anybody to be bringing their handguns anywhere. And also, I think it's concerning that if people are saying that they want to feel safe when they're out and about, it's like, well, then what do we need to fix to make it be you feel safe without needing a gun?
Well, yeah,
and out and about, oh, that's terrifying. It's like you realize that's not normal, right? You shouldn't need to feel a gun to feel safe outside of you shouldn't need that. So what can we start working on to, make you feel safe outside your home? But no one is going to address that. They're just like, well, nope, I can carry a gun. And it just, the people are already so trigger happy. They're already so trigger happy. When they perceive danger. The guy who killed Trayvon Martin, had his gun outside his home.
He was a wannabe cop.
He was, but there's so many people like that, and they can get guns. They can get guns with no problem. Yeah. So and now they're gonna be able to just carry it. And then the next time they see a black teenager with their hood up, oh no, I'm terrified. It's just really dangerous to let anybody who it feels that jumpy all the time that they need a gun with them at all times to be allowed to have their gun with them at all times.
It's an example here of just Caleb Maupin, my guest yesterday, my guest co-host. He was talking about. He said, "What kind of people is this country producing at this point?
Yeah,
if people are that scared all the time that they have to be armed all the time when they have no particular threat. It's not like they're carrying money around as part of their jobs. It's not like they have received credible threats against their lives. They're just afraid to move around. And one thing that I've heard from friends who are not Americans is that they perceive Americans as a very fearful people. And I think that's interesting because we're supposed to be home of the brave. But instead we're considered to be cowed, fearful people who feel a need to carry lethal weapons with us wherever we go. And again, my question is this good? Is anything going to stop this trajectory in this country? It's been going on for a while now. Where can we put a stop to people feeling that fearful with an absolute lack of faith in our institutions?
And there are currently more guns than people living in America. That was a statistic that kind of shook me, but it's all the statistics I could find, it's there's approximately 120.5 guns for every 100 people. There's 390 million firearms owned by civilians in America. And that's not including military personnel or police officers, but 330 million people who live here. And according to in 2020, the number of gun purchases went up, but so they haven't redone some of those. Yeah, we can pop up the sign here. It's absolutely nuts. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation said that firearm purchases by proxy jumped 40% in 2020 from the previous year to 39.7 million, and it only just kind of went down a little bit left in 2021, but it's still absolutely wild. There have been a lot of background checks happening which is good, but 10 million background checks through April 30th for gun purchasing. And it's the other polls from other places shows the average American gun owner has 5 guns. Of course they do. and the judges are kind of, even the conservative judges who voted on this are a little bit like, shaky in how strongly they feel about it. So like Thomas, Justice Thomas, is real salty that there's been judicial deference to the states in regards to gun laws. He thinks the courts should just make the decision. And then, there's certain places that you shouldn't allow guns that are sensitive, like schools and government buildings, but to say that all of Manhattan is a sensitive space is a bridge too far. He didn't try to find other places with mass gatherings, like movie theaters or nightclubs or anything like that. Kavanaugh did say that it shouldn't affect shall issue laws in states that might require additional hoops. Like if your state already requires certain hoops to jump through, that shouldn't change too much. And Kavanaugh was like, yeah, maybe we should have the wait times be longer. But Thomas was like, why? What if he just really want it? Like, it's 25 states already don't require even a permit.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't realize. I know you have to have the FOID card, but
yeah, but like there's a lot of like some of them, like at least to carry, like you carry it,
right.
Like a carry permit. Like it's ridiculous. It's terrifying, and it's just getting worse.
Well, I think, for me, somebody once put it this way. He said, look, you have a conflict with somebody, and okay, you start by using words. You might go into fists. Somebody brings a bat, then somebody has a knife, and then it escalates and it escalates.
Yeah.
And when you have tightly wound people, who have become more tightly wound, and you mentioned that gun purchases went up in 2020. Yeah, because people were very scared. They were terrified that we had a global health crisis. Nobody knew what the heck was going on. Frankly, our government institutions completely failed us as far as I'm concerned at that point. And people were out buying guns. I was talking to a friend of mine about it, and his buddy was saying, oh yeah, I just went out and bought, all this ammo. And he said to his friend, what are you going to do? Shoot the virus? Or guard your 200 rolls of toilet paper?
Right.
But people were just, they wanted their guns, even though a gun is not going to protect you against a virus.
And, there's the whole, like, a good guy with, and now with all the mass shootings, I get, like, people want to have the gun, like, oh, I can shoot. It's like, that almost never works. The good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun. Almost never actually happens. At least not in any kind of timely way. Like, even when police are on site, like at Uvalde, they were there for hours. And like, it happens over and over again. Like, someone is there, they've got the gun, they are the good guy, supposedly, but, either them shooting just creates more bullets and mayhem, or they end up getting hurt themselves. And it's just a good guy with a gun. It's not a good defense. It's not.
If you're not a criminal, that you're not thinking like the criminal.
Right.
And, for example, the tragedy that happened on Monday, well, as a matter of fact, if somebody puts themselves into a good vantage point and decides to start rat-a-tat-tat with their gun, there's not much you can do in terms of defense at that point.
And the other problem is that a lot of times the people who are instigating these mass shootings aren't really planning on getting out of it alive. They don't care if they get out of it alive. And the people who are trying to do the protecting do. And that makes your reactions really different. So that's why I do advocate for more, like, much stricter gun restrictions, restricting ammo. Like, if you can't get at the things you need, it's harder to hurt people.